Hi, welcome to a lesson in structured data in JavaScript, also known as API 1. We're doing things a bit different today, so let's see how it pans out. The first thing is today's learning objective. The student has acquired an understanding of the technologies used to store and exchange data, and the ability to account for the choice of technologies based on practice. What I need you to be able to do at the end of this lesson is to judge whether you need structured data in your solution, and should that data be in JSON format. You shouldn't have read anything for today, so you're lucky with that. We will be doing a lot of coding today, and I will be coding and I will put in some breaks where I tell you to pause the video and show you some code while it's paused, and then you have the option or the chance to type in the code yourselves. So just listen to what I say while I'm coding, and then I'll give you a break once in a while where you can code the stuff yourself. I will be making errors on the way, and you can sort of follow how I debug these errors. Okay, let's get on with it. Yes, today's agenda is we need to talk about JSON, what it is, how it's structured, and we talk about how we traverse the data, how we travel through it, and we talk about how we extract data from a JSON object. There was a part of the lesson which were about retrieving data from external sources, which means getting data from another website and then showing it, or another server, and then showing it on your own website. We'll do that for the next lecture. So JSON, structured data in JavaScript. The thing is that JSON is an acronym for the JavaScript object notation, which basically describes objects in JavaScript as a variable, and the structure of that object, and what the content is. So that's the whole thing about JSON and what it contains. Let's see. Okay, so let's say we want to store the content of a website in JSON data, so that we can grab data from that JSON object and show it on the website. But we don't just want to we don't just want to store a single page in this JSON object. We want to store information about the whole website. And what we want to do is we have three categories there. We have information about the website in general, stuff that appears on every page in the website, which is sort of like the footer information of the email address and the address. And we have the title appends and prepends, which are things that go in front or after the title in the tab when we look at the browser tabs. Usually companies have like you show the title of the web page, and then it has like a pipe and then Svalegon or whatever afterwards, so that the brand is always there. So stuff like that. Then we have another type of information. We have pages, which is another type of object here. And the pages have stuff like name and title and a header and images and text, and we need to know if the page is hidden or not. Should it be visible in navigation? The third type is news, and news items have a date and they have a title, and we need to know if they're hidden or if they're shown, and they should have a header and an image and a teaser and a text. So we have these three different types of objects that we want to be able to show, where information about the website is sort of a general thing, and pages and news are specific to each of the each of the different types of pages there. So how can we construct a JSON object which conforms to these demands? Well, we have information about the site, and as you can see here, we have I choose to create this variable, this JSON data, as a constant, because it's not going to change. So instead of writing let or var, I write constant here. So it's basically the same thing. It's just a matter of memory management and processing power. And if you write really large programs in JavaScript, this matters, but it doesn't for us now. But I want to do it the right way. So we have the constant of data. This is just data is just a variable name. You can call it whatever you like. It makes sense to me if it's called data in this case. So that's what I'm doing. And we set data to be equal to something, and that is an object. We have these curly brackets here and there, which means that we are dealing with an object. And inside of that object we have different key value pairs. Let's see, we have the site information here, which is another object, and you can see I've written site, and site is in quotation marks. These can be single or double, doesn't matter. In some cases you can even leave them out, because the text here will be interpreted as a variable name. So it's sort of like data isn't in quotes, because it's a variable that we are initializing here. In the same way we're actually initializing a variable down here. But in some cases JSON data demands that we have these variable names in quotes. So I just always put them in quotes to be on the safe side. I don't want to go and do it all over again afterwards if something goes wrong with it. So I put them in quotes. And we have a colon, which means now the key ends, and we start looking at the value instead. The value here is empty. This is an empty object. And then we have a comma. A comma means we're done with this key value pair, so we move on to the next key value pair. Every time we move on to a new key value pair, we set a comma. And when there aren't any more key value pairs, we don't set a comma. The general rule in JSON is that you cannot have a comma after the last object inside, or after the last key value pair. So we put them between our key value pairs. But we have sites, we have site, and we have pages. And pages have squared brackets instead of curly brackets, which means that we have to. This is set up to be an array because we need more than one page in there. We just have one website, so we just create an object for that. But for pages we need to have several objects. So we start out by saying, well, we need an array, so I've put in square brackets. For news, we have news items, and it's the same deal. The key, the colon, which says, okay, the key is done for now, and then the content. In this case, also an array, because we have more than one news item. As I said, the curly brackets are for objects. The square brackets are for arrays. So that's a list of objects. Yeah. All right. So in our example today, we have the site here, and inside of the site we decided that we needed an object, and the reason we do that is that we have several key value pairs that we want to show. The first one is footer, and that contains a new object because we want more than one information inside of footer. For title prepend and title append, those are just let's see, we'll need to go here. They are strings, both of them, and I've just added empty strings, so I've just put in quotation marks with nothing in between them, which initialize them as a string that is empty. When we look at the data that I've put on canvas in the zip file, you can see that I have actually put in some stuff here. It's not just empty data or empty strings. Alright, for pages we do things a bit differently. We have information about the page, and we have one page object per page that should be in the solution. In this case, we're only showing one object here. This is the information about the page, and these are the curly brackets that surrounds it. If we want another page, we have a comma down here, and then we have a new set of curly brackets with the same type of information in it. But let's go through what's in here. There's a unique ID, the number of the page, or sorry, the ID for the page, which is a number, and in this case I've put it in number 1, and you can see the 1 is not in quotation marks, it is a number, so we don't put numbers in quotation marks. As soon as we put quotation marks around them, they become strings instead, so they are behaving as text and are being interpreted as text if we put quotation marks around them. We don't want that. We want this to be a number. Then we have metadata, which is a key with a value that is a new object. And inside of that object we have a name, which is a string. We have title, which is a string, and we have visible, which is a boolean, so that can be true or false. We want all of our pages to be visible to begin with, so they are set to true. You can try fiddling about with it later and setting them to false and see what happens. But the code that we end up with should be able to tell the difference if a page should be shown or not. Then we have content, another key value pair where the value is an object. In this case we have header, image and text, which are strings. And they will basically just be what's going to be in the headline, what's going to be in the image URL, the source attribute on the image, and then what kind of text should be on the page. There's a problem we need to solve here, because our system is going to work so that if we write page ID is equal to something in the URL when we type in our address, we want to find the page that has that corresponding ID. If we can't find anything in the URL about page ID, we want our code to go through each of the pages, find the one who's got the attribute, also the key root page on it in metadata, and that key should have a value of true. When we find a page with that, we want that page to be the page shown if no page ID is put inside of the URL. This means that that page will be the front page of our website if we don't type anything specific. So we'll come back to that. News, yes, this is another array of objects. It's very much like pages. We have an ID. There's one object per news item, and as you can see, there's a comma down here, which means that I've prepared for entering a new one. But this would actually give me an error if I tried to run this code, because that comma isn't supposed to be there right now. I need another object behind it. But we have a unique ID again, we have some metadata, we have date, which is the date shown on the web page. Then I have prepared something for sorting, and I have mistyped it here, so it shouldn't be data sort, it should be date sort. And a title, again string, and visible, true, false. We have the content key, where we have an object with header, image, teaser and text. We have teaser here because we need to have some sort of small text to lure the user to read the rest. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. No. Alright, so what does this look like? I will boot up a Visual Studio and a Chrome now and show you, and you don't have to do anything for now, but you will later on, so give me a second here. I will go to GitHub and I will find this lesson and I will open it in Visual Studio. here I have, if I fold this out, you can see that I have an index file, and I have the JSON script here, and inside of the JSON script I have a script.js file here where I have my data object, and you can see I have site, and I've added some information to it. I have added some text inside of address, and I have added text inside of email, and what I've done is that I have put in some HTML. You can see there are tags in here, which basically just means that I wanted to output whatever's in there into the page when we get that far. After site, you can use these small arrows to fold in and fold out in your code, and this goes not only for the JSON objects but for every part of your code. So get used to using those. They are really helpful. Yes, and as you can see here, I have pages, and I have a lot of pages. If I fold these in, you can see that I have an array here that I start with the square brackets and end with the square brackets, not scare brackets. And for each of these I have an object with a comma between. So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages for now. Okay, and each page has an ID, some metadata, visible. Oh, this one is hidden, right? About you is hidden, so that shouldn't show up in the navigation when we get that far. If we look at the first page, you can see that has the root page true, as I talked about earlier. None of the other pages has that. If they have root page, they don't need to have root page on them, because I'm only searching for any page with the key that also has the value true. So I only need to set it for the page that I actually want to be the root page. If we look at this one down here, you can see there's no such thing as root page on this one, but that doesn't matter because it will find it on the first one. Yes, I have the template key value pair as well. This is being used later on for determining whether a page should be rendered in one way or another. I have two types of templates. I have page, which is a normal page, and then I have news, which is for the page that also shows the news items. So I have a slightly different HTML for that page. Okay. But how does this look in the browser? As you can see down here, I've added console log data, which means that the browser should output the data variable, which is the object, into the console. So let's see what we can see there. I'm using Control B on PC to swap between having this panel open and not. On Mac it's Command B as far as I know. I have installed Open with Live Server, so I'm doing that. And I just need to grab my stuff from up here. There we go. So if we look at the console here, I'll press F12. There's elements, console. If I press console, and it's failing to load the server, so I'll just reload it. And you can see that I console logged the data object. Let's go back and see that. Here, console log data, which means that when it gets to this part of the code, line 184, it should output whatever is inside of the data object. And we can see on the right it says script.js 184, so we're on the right line. And if I start unfolding this, you can see that it's the same exact structure as we had inside of our JSON object, except for one thing. It shows proto objects once in a while in here, which basically is just the browser telling us what type of object we're dealing with, and it's not part of the actual object data. It's sort of a type of meta information about the object that we're looking at. And you can see if we don't fold it out, we have site, which is an object, and then we have pages, which is an array of 5 pages, and news items, which are which is an array of 4 objects. So it gives us a nice overview of what's going on. Okay, if we look at the index file here, you can see that we have a doc type declaration, we have the normal HTML begin and end. We start our head here. We of course remember to set our charset to UTF-8. We don't need anything in title. That will be filled out automatically by our JavaScript when we get to it. We have viewport, which makes sure that our things are nice and responsive, right? And I use a normalized CSS. I have my style sheet CSS. And then I have a link to my script file. And I'll just put defer in here. That might be in the code that you've been handed, but I want to make sure that my code is executed after the HTML has done loading. That's important because we're looking for objects, elements inside of it, and want to put some information into those. So we need the HTML to be finished loading in browser before we start actually trying to find stuff in it. And inside of the body tag we have a navigation tag and the main tag with our div ID equals root in it, and this is for putting our page inside of it. So that will be the content of the page. Navigation, here we will of course put a UL an auto.list with list items inside of it, which are the navigation items that we can click on. And for the footer tag, well, we will be putting the address and email address of the company inside of here. And I need to update this. It's another year. Alright. Good. Let's go back to our slides. We've done that, and we've looked at this, which is nice. Yes, and now it's time for you to download the zip file from today's lecture on Canvas. Unpack it, and you'll want to keep these files. Open index.html with the browser, and then open Visual Studio Code and drag the entire unzipped folder onto there, so that you have the entire project open in Visual Studio Code, not just a couple of files that you want to edit. Yes, and open index.html and script.js in Visual Studio Code. That should be right about it. And when you're ready with that, just pause the video and make sure that you've done this. And when you have done all of this, just unpause again, and we'll continue. Okay, let's get coding. You've loaded up index.html and script.js in Visual Studio Code, and you've probably got index.html running in a browser. And as you can see, the JSON object is showing in the console because we have the console log data here. The first thing we need to do is we need to figure out which page ID we have to show. So which page we have to show, and we do this by grabbing the page ID from the URL and putting it into a variable that we then use to render the page with. But first of all, we need to create a variable. So let's set let page ID be equal to, and then I am calling on a function that hasn't been created yet, but we will in a few seconds. Page ID from URL. Please note that I'm using camel case so that it's easier to read what it says. Get capital P, capital I, capital F, capital letter for every word that's in there. When we've got the page ID, we can then call upon a function which actually draws the page. That function hasn't been created yet, but we will in a second as well. So I'm calling this drawSite, and what we need to tell that is page ID. So now we have the basis ready here. We've got a variable with the page ID that we get from getPageIdFromUrl, and then we enter that page ID variable into the drawSite as a parameter, into the drawSite function as a parameter. Of course, neither of these functions exist yet, so we'll have to create those. The first thing we need to do is to create the getPageIdFromUrl function, and we do this by starting up the function getPageIdFromUrl. And this is by far the most complicated thing that we're going to do today, so bear with me and hang on and don't get frustrated. I'll explain as well as I can, and then you might come back to it later and figure out how it actually works, but we'll see. So the first thing we do is that we need to set up a page ID variable that we can use. So page ID, we'll set that to 0 to begin with, because then if we don't change it, it will be 0 at the end. And in drawSite, if that function receives a page ID of 0, then we'll make it do something else. We'll make it look for the root page variable inside of the pages in the JSON data, and then show that page instead. So that's why we're initializing this with a 0, because we'll just keep it 0 if we can't find anything in the URL. The whole idea is that we need to find something in the URL. So let's say we have the address of mysite.com, and if we have a question mark, then we're starting on parameters. And we are looking for something like this, where we have a parameter called page ID, and then we want to grab the data from that. The thing about media query list events, my website, thank you, is that we can have more than one parameter in a URL. So in the URL we can have something is equal to Irish, or something else is equal to this. So we can have more than one parameter in a URL. So this is a parameter, and this is a parameter, and this is a parameter. And you can see that the first separation is between the URL of the domain, with the top level domain, and then the rest, and that is done by adding a question mark. So the question mark is an indicator of there are some parameters added to this URL, and the parameters are separated by ampersands. So that's what our code will be doing. I'll just keep this here so that we can come back to it later on. I'll make these examples a bit more easy to read. Good, alright. So the first thing we need to do is to actually get the URL of the page that we're on. So I'm gonna store that in a constant called URL, because that's a good name. You can call it whatever you want. I just think URL is a fitting name for it. And we need to grab something from the browser now. We need to get the address, and what we do is that we can access the window object in JavaScript, and the window is the current tab that we're in. And we have information about the location in that tab, and there's more than just information about the URL in that location. So we need to find the sub thing that has to do with the URL. And if we press dot here, we can see there are a lot of different things. There's href, origin, path name, port, protocol, reload, etc. If we choose href, we will get the entire thing. Sort of like href when you have a link, right? So if we try to output this, let's say console.log, there we go, console.log, and we output the URL here. Then we'll output the variable URL, which contains the href from the location of the window. Let's see what happens. drawSite is not defined. Oh no. And that's because we're calling on the drawSite function, which hasn't been defined yet. So let's just create that function drawSite, and we can always fill something into it later on. Let's just say page ID here. So we got everything ready. Okay, let's go back and look at that console URL again here. So now we've got, let's actually comment this one out so we only see the one thing that we need to see. As you can see, this URL up here is the same down here, but we've got the protocol with it as well. If I add something here, page ID is equal to 123, you'll see that this changes to match whatever I typed up here. So we've got this string now. That is the URL variable. And this string we can play around with, and we can measure what's going on in it. The first thing we need to do is we need to figure out if it says page ID anywhere in it. Because if it does, then we have some information that we need to grab from it. If it doesn't, well, then we probably need to get the root page instead. I'll disable that thing, comment that out. So we need to figure out if it says page ID anywhere inside of this. We can do this by using the indexOf method for strings, where if we use indexOf and we find what we're looking for, we get a number back, and that number is the position of where that thing we're looking for is starting. If we don't find it, we get a -1 back. So we can figure out if something is in a string by asking if the result is different from -1. So let's try that out. If URL.indexOf, and indexOf is a method where we query whatever's inside of that string. We figure out what's inside of it. And what we're looking for is page ID with a capital small p, with a lowercase p, and an uppercase I, page ID. If the index of this is different from 1, well, then we have found page ID somewhere in the URL. So what we actually need to do is we need to separate. We found page ID in the URL, so we need to discard of this bit, right? We need to get rid of that bit because we need to do something with the rest of it. So we'll make a split. We'll split the string that we get by question mark, so that we actually get an array from it. An array with this part, an array with this, an array where the first item is this part, mywebsite.com, and the second item will be this part. Everything that comes after the question mark. So let's do create a new constant called URL split, because that's what it's containing. So URL.split, where split is the method we use to split the string into two. And you can use double quotation marks or single quotation marks, that doesn't matter. But we need to have a question mark here because that's what we're splitting the string into. Not into. So now we've got URL split, and if we console log that, URL split, we will see that it has got 2 items in it. If we fold those out, we can see item on index 1 is whatever was before the question mark, and item item in index 1 is whatever was after the question mark. I'll just get rid of some of these console logs here to clean up the code. And now we've got the 2 parts, and we want the second part. And we want to check that second part if there are any ampersands in it. We want to check if it's containing anything more than just page ID. Because we've just checked if there's page ID in it. Yes, there is. Somewhere in this part of the URL there's going to be page ID in it. So we want to split it, or actually we want to check if there are any ampersands in. And if there aren't any, then it's easy, because then we're just dealing with this part, right? So we can use that. But if there are any ampersands in it, then we need to do something else. But let's just check it to see if there are any, and if there aren't, then we do the easy thing first, and then we can make the complicated thing later. So if URL split, which is the variable we just created up here, if that we're looking for question marks. So we're saying if URL split, and we want to take the second part, which is index 1. That's everything here, right? That's URL split 1. That's containing this part. If that has a index of with ampersand that is equal to -1, then we know that there aren't any ampersands in this string. So now we can just concentrate on separating page ID from the value it's got, because what we're looking at is something like this right now. This will be the result. This will be the value of URL split 1. It will be page ID is equal to something. So we can concentrate on splitting up this part now. And the thing that's separating the 2 values that we want to split up is an equal to sign. So we will do a split by that. We'll create a new const and call it parameter split. Yes. And we'll set that to be equal to URL split 1. Where we split that by the equal sign. This means that we have now got a new array called parameter split, which contains 2 items. Whatever was before the equal sign and whatever was after the equal sign. So whatever was after the equal sign will be the number of the page that we want to show. So we can now say page ID is equal to parameter split 1, because this is parameter split 0 and this is parameter split 1. It could be whatever, but this is the item on index 1 in the array. So we've got this part now. This means that if we write page ID is equal to something in our code right now, we should get the value that is in that parameter. But first of all, we need to we're just calling this function right now and adding the result from it to page ID, but we're not returning anything in this function. We need to do that. So we'll say return page ID which is the variable that we created up here. So now when we call getPageIdFromUrl, we initiate a variable page ID with 0. So that's our baseline. Then we figure out the URL we're on. We check if that URL has a page ID in it anywhere. If it has, then we do something. If it hasn't, well, then we just return page ID. So for now, if there aren't any page ID in the URL, it will return 0. And let's have drawSite output whatever is in page ID so that we can see it. So if we haven't got any parameters right now on the page, then it should return 0. If we have parameters and the parameter is page ID, then it should return whatever was in that page ID. Let's see. Right now we have page ID 123. If I remove this part and load the page again, it says 0. If I write something else is equal to something, it still says 0 because it haven't found page ID anywhere. If we rename this to page ID, then it will write the result of that here, or the content of that here. What happens if we add something else here? Then we get page ID 0. Why is that? Well, basically our code is just checking to see if there are any ampersands, and if there aren't any, then it does something. But what happens if there are ampersands? Well, then we need to do something else. And do something else means adding an else to this if sentence. The first thing we need to do is split up whatever comes after here that has been separated by ampersands. Let's make this more easy to look at. So if we have several parameters that are separated by ampersands, then we can create a new array with a split of ampersand. So let's do that. And we're still dealing with URL split 1 because that is, let me just check here, yeah, because that is containing this part of the URL. So we'll create a new constant called URL parameters plural is equal to URL split yes, and then we'll take position 1 there, index 1, which is this part. So now URL parameters is this part, right? But we need to split it by ampersands. So we'll do that here. So we'll say split, not split, split, and we'll split by an ampersand. So now we should have URL parameters, which is a bunch of items in an array, depending on how many ampersands we've got. Let's try that out. We'll console log that. And we don't have any other console logs. Alright, so let's see. Right now we've got 2. There are 2 parameters, page ID and let's call it something else. Let's call it A. And as you can see, we've got these 2 items in the array. If we add any more and B is equal to something else, then we've got 3 items in the array. Okay. So URL parameters is now an array of items. And what we should do now is we should go looking for the one of those which have page ID as the key in it. So let's loop through them, however many there are. So for let I be equal to 0, and as long as I is lesser than the length of URL parameters, then we keep going. And for every cycle we add 1 to I. Good. Now we've got our for loop. And inside of our for loop, we need to check every time to see if the URL parameter name is containing page ID. So if URL parameters and we need to get the current one, so square brackets and I, which is the current one in our for loop. So that will be in index 0 on the first and index 1 on the next, etc. We need to check the first 6 characters of the string to see if they contain the word page ID. And if they do, well, then we're good. So if substring .6, which means start from index 0 and go 6 letters or characters beyond that. If that is equal to page ID, then we found the parameter key value pair that fits page ID. So if we found it, we can then take the value of that key value pair and add to our page ID. So let's create a new constant called page ID split and set that to be equal to URL parameters and the one we're at. Not one, I, sorry. Dot split, because now we want to split it by the equal sign, because right now we've got something like this and we want to split it by the equal sign and grab the last part. And I need to write const, not constant. So we've got we should have page ID split should be the latter part, the second part of this bit, right? So that should be the numbers here. So we can just say set page ID to be equal to page ID split and index 1, because right now page ID split is an array with 2 items, the first item being page ID, the text page ID, and the second item being the whatever value was after equal. Alright, we're doing a for loop. Maybe we have a bunch of parameters, so we want to stop when we found the right one. So right here we can type break, which means that it will break that for loop that we're in. So it will skip the rest and go on with the code. And since we've added our value to page ID, well, then we should be done. Let's see if it works. It does. Nice. 1, 2, 3. Let's try reloading that. 1. That's good. What happens if we move this? It still figures out that it needs to get page ID and the number 1. Okay, so we're good. I will leave this part. I'll zoom out just a little bit so that you can see everything. I will leave this on the screen and you can type it in as it is. Just pause the video and type this stuff in, and then I'll see you in a few seconds in my time. Right, I'll remove this part just to clean the code up a bit. Yeah, and zoom in again. So we've got the function that grabs page ID from URL. That was by far the most complicated thing we're doing today. So if you got through that without killing yourself, then thumbs up. So I need to grab a drink here. Cheers. So we have to do something with drawSite. We have to draw the content onto our web page. And to do that, we first need to, we've got the page ID from the call to the function, which adds it as a parameter. And since it's here, it's basically a variable that we can use inside of our code now. So we can say, well, if page ID is equal to 0, then we know that there isn't any page ID in the URL, because that's what we've been preparing the code for. So we can go looking for the page in our JSON data that has the root page set to true. So if it's 0, well, then we go looking through the different pages in our data set, in our JSON data set. So we'll create a new for loop. For let I be equal to 0, and as long as I is lesser than the length of data.pages, we'll keep going, and for every iteration we add 1 to I. Why do I write data.pages here? Well, it's because the pages are in the data object. So let's see what happens here. We've got data. That's the first thing I need to type, and then pages, and that will return this array that's in here. So by checking the length of that, I basically know how many pages there are. And then I want to go through each of these pages to find the one that has got a root page set to true. So I create a new if sentence here. If data.pages, and this is plural, and the one we're currently at, because we're going through the for loop and I is increasing, so we start with I being 0, so pages index 0, that will be the first one. If the data here, metadata, because that's what we're looking for here, pages, let's find one to have an example. We've got data, pages, metadata, root page, that's what we're looking for. So in that order we need to type things in here. Metadata and root page, and you can see there's a question mark here. That's because there's only one of the items, I presume there's only one of our pages that actually has this key value pair, and I'm guessing that it's putting this question mark in here in Visual Studio Code because it knows that there's only one of them who's got it. If I click on it, you'll see the question mark is gone. So I'm presuming that Visual Studio Code is warning me that it's not present on all of the pages. If this value is equal to both in value and in type, it has to be a boolean, and that boolean has to be true. That's what the 3 equal signs means. Then we do something. Then we grab the page ID from that page we're on and put it inside of the page ID variable. So we say page ID is equal to data.pages, the page we're currently in the loop, and then the ID from that page, which will be, as you can see here, pages ID, so it's just .id. Okay, and when we found our page, we don't need to go through the rest with our for loop, so we can just add a break here as well. So now we stop the for loop because we found the page, so we don't need to do anything else. And all of this was if page ID was equal to 0. So now we need to do something with our information here. We need to draw a footer, we need to draw a navigation, and we need to draw the content of the page. So I'm going to call on some functions that hasn't been created yet. The footer will always be the same on all pages, so we don't need to give the footer function any information about which page we want to draw. So we just called a function called drawFooter, which will put whatever information should be in the footer in the footer. Then we create a new function called drawNav later on. Right now we'll type it in as if it exists, and we'll give that our page ID, because we need to give it something to work with, because the navigation will draw all of the pages in the navigation, but we'll have to highlight the one that's active. So that's why I'm giving it a page ID, so that we can figure out which page is the active one. And then we need to draw the page itself. So drawPage, and that will need the page ID as well, right? Yeah, that makes sense. So to be able to test this, we can just create some empty functions for it, because right now it will come up with an error. Let's see, of missing functions. Yeah, reference error, drawFooter is not defined. So we will just create some empty functions. Function drawFooter. And we can duplicate this a couple of times, and we need to draw nav, and we need to draw page. And yeah, we'll get to those when we get there. So now we shouldn't have any errors. Fine, we're good, and that's nice. Alright, so that's drawSite for you. You can type all of this in and check that you don't get any errors. Pause the video now and do that. Okay. Let's start out with drawFooter and make that work. For drawFooter, we need no additional information. We just need to grab some data from our JSON object. We need to get some information from the site part of it. We have information for the footer here. We've got an address and email. So we can find information in data, site, footer, address, or data, site, footer, email, right? Those two we need to put in there. And to do this, we'll create a new constant called footer string. And I will set that to be equal to something. And then we put in some HTML here with the variables in them. And to do this cleverly, we can use what is called accent grave in French. And on a PC, it is positioned right here on the keyboard next to the backspace key. And yeah, I've got colors in my keyboard. I'm using it for CS, so I can tell the difference between weapons, right? I don't want to hear about it. So we use accent grave, shift, and the key right next to backspace. And after you've pushed that key, hold down shift and press that key, you need to press space to actually get a character from it, because it's usually a character that's put on top of other characters, like let's see, like an A or whatever. Yeah. So we've got these. Accent grave means that we can lay out the code any way we want, and that will be actually be copied in our code when it puts the string into our code. And we also have the option to use variables, but let's start out with doing a headline for this. Let's create an H4 and write contact us. After that, we'll create a new line. We'll put in address. And we'll give the address the ID as well. ID address. And it's Emmet doesn't autocomplete, or Visual Studio Code doesn't autocomplete our HTML here because we're actually in JavaScript, and it don't know how to interpret it, and you can see it's all the same color and stuff, so we haven't got our syntax highlighting here, and that's a shame, but that's just how it is. We want to have a div as well with an ID of email, div again, and we need to put some data inside of these two tags here. And to do that, we can write $ and curly brackets. This enables us to, this tells JavaScript that we are now in an area where we write JavaScript inside of the HTML. And that JavaScript could be as simple as the name of a variable. So if we write data site.footer.address, then we're moving into our JSON object. The data part is the name of the variable, our objects. Then under site, we've got footer and we've got address, just like we did up here, right? Sorry, data site footer address. So that's the address part. And we'll do the same for email down here. $ curly brackets, data site dot footer dot email. Alright, so now we've got these added informations into this footer string, and we need to output that footer string somewhere. And to do that, I'm creating a new function because I don't want to write the same thing a lot of times. And we'll be calling on a function called drawHtml. And that function will be accepting two parameters. The first parameter is where do I draw the content? And the second parameter is what is the content? So the first one, and we're using CSS selectors here. So I can find something by ID. And this will be ID footer. And the second parameter will be whatever we wanted to put there. So that will be footer string here. Of course, this doesn't work yet. We haven't created drawHtml. So let's just write this down here below. drawHtml. And this accepts two parameters again. So we need to write those in. I'll just see through my code here to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. Yes, drawHtml. And what we want is the element ID, and we want the new content. And as you can see, these aren't remotely named as I've done when I'm calling the function, and that doesn't matter at all. I'm just basically creating two new variables here that are to be used inside of the function. And the value of these variables is whatever you put in the parameters when you call the function. So in this case, the element ID will be a string with hashtag footer, and new content will be whatever is in the string up here, right? So that's what I'm passing to drawHtml. And to output this into our document, we need to access the document first. So the document object, document, and then we need to find out where to output it. So we'll use query selector, it's called, and that basically just finds an object that fits the CSS selector that we're putting in here. So if we just add element ID here, sorry, there we go, element ID, and what does it need to put there? Well, it needs to put new content, the value of new content inside of there. So we just change the inner HTML of whatever element that we're grabbing here. Inner HTML, and that is uppercase. Yes, that's uppercase, and we set that to be equal to new content. This means that we can now access this function called drawHtml with an ID and whatever we need to put in there. So this function will do that for us every time if we just use drawHtml. Let's see if it works. Oh no, there's an unexpected error, unexpected token. So I messed something up here. drawHtml. let's see what's going on. It's probably something that I messed up before. It is you got it? Okay, I got it now. It's a function, it's a new function. Maybe we should use the function keyword in front of it. That would help. So if we write function drawHtml, we're defining a function, not just calling on it. Pretty weird, huh? Let's see. Okay, we're good now. It's writing contact us, and then the address beneath this. And if we look into the code, here we can see we've got footer, where we're matching the footer ID, and whatever we put inside of our string shows up here. So we're good so far. So feel free to write in drawFooter and drawHtml, those two functions, and check that it works. And you can pause the video now and do that. Okay, the next part is draw navigation. And yeah, I'll zoom out a bit again. And we are accepting a parameter of page ID. I won't call it page ID here, I'll call it current page ID, because that makes more sense in my code afterwards. Again, whatever we call our variable that we add as a parameter when we call our function, that doesn't matter. The naming of it is irrelevant. We'll just create a new variable down here with that value that we pass on. And to draw the navigation, first we need to create an unordered list, URL start, URL end, and in between those we need to put some list items. And we'll start a new string called nav string for navigation string, and not len but let nav string, and I don't want an uppercase n, I want a lowercase. We'll set that to be equal to a unordered list start tag. And now what we need to do is we need to loop through all of the pages in the JSON data. And we need to find all of those pages that have visible true, and we need to render those in the navigation. So let's go look for that. So we'll do a for loop. For let I be equal to 0 as long as I is lesser than data.pages.length. We then increment I by 1 for each pass. So now we've set up a for loop that looks through all of the pages in our JSON object. And for each of those we need to check if it's if visible is set to true. So if data.pages and the current one is I, and we check metadata because that's where it's the visible key value pair is. If that is true, then we do something. And please note that I don't have to write is equal to true. As long as it's a boolean that can be true or false, I can just write it like this, where I just write, well, the result of this, if that's true, well, then it keeps doing whatever the if sentence wants, and if it's false, then it doesn't do it. It don't do it. It won't do it. You don't want doesn't. So yeah, if that's visible, then we render it in the navigation. But we also want to check if the page that we're currently on is the one that we're trying to render in the navigation, because if that's true, then we want that page to look special in the navigation. We want to highlight it as the active page. And we'll do this by creating a variable called active page, and we'll just make that an empty string, and we'll basically print the results of active page into our HTML when we create the list item. And the basis of this is that if we are not on the current page ID, well, then we just leave active page as an empty string. But if we are on the current page ID, then we add a class active to it and print that with the list item. Let's do it. It'll make more sense when I actually do this. So if data.pages I, which is the current page we're at in our loop, ID is equal to the current page ID, then we do something. So what we're doing here is we're matching the page that we're on, the ID of the page that we're on in our loop, with the value that we've got from current page ID, right? And if those two match, then we're on the page that's actually the one that's being displayed right now. And if that's true, then we set active page to be equal to something new. We'll set it to class be equal to active, because then we have some CSS that highlights that page when we add class active to it. And this if sentence is done by now, so we're basically just creating a new active page variable, and we're changing that variable if we're on the active page. This could be done differently. I'll just show it for those of you who are really into this stuff. If we say let active page be equal to, and then we can add a test. Then we can say, if this is the case, then if it's true, then we say that it is equal to this part. If not, then it's equal to this part. So this line down here is actually exactly the same as this whole part up here. It's just a shorthand version. So we're creating a variable. We're doing an if test. We're doing an if sentence. And if that sentence is true, then the variable is giving this value. If it's not, then it's giving this value. It's a shorthand version of an if sentence if you're into this sort of thing. I will leave it here as commented out. You don't have to do it this way. This might make more sense to you. It probably will. But if you want to learn this, then I'll leave it in here. So good. Now we've got our active page string, and we're on a page that we need to render because visible is true. So we can create a list item now, and we can do this by saying, well, we'll add something to navString, which is the navigation, which is the variable that we started up here where we added the UL. So we'll add something to navString, and we use the plus equal to because then we add to the existing part of it. So we'll keep this part and add something more to it when we do it like this. Again with the accent gaps, so that we can write layouted text and we can add variables easily. We need to do a list item. This list item first of all needs to have that active page variable added to it. So active page is either nothing if it's not the active page, or active page is this value. So if we just add that down here, then we either write nothing in here or we write the value of class equals active. So that will be put into the HTML. I will do myself a favor and end that li right away. And then we need to have an a tag to have an actual link. And I will end that right away to do myself a favor. And inside of the href here, we need to add the link to the page that we're in the for loop, right? And we do that by just making an href that points to where we're at, but with the added parameter of page ID, which is set to be equal to. Then we use $ curly brackets again to add a variable, and that variable is data.pages. The page we're at in our for loop is I, and then ID, which means that now we're writing the ID of the current page that we're in our for loop at after page ID in the link. And now we need to have some text that you can click on with that link. So we'll add a new variable again here from our JSON object, data pages I, the one we're at in our for loop. And then we need to get the metadata, and let's just take name from there. Let's go up to our information here and see what's going on. So we've got pages, metadata, name. So that'll be home that we're putting in for the first page. Alright, so we've got our URL start, and for each page, we're adding to that nav string. When we're done with this, with our for loop, we need to end our string with a UL end. So we'll add nav string plus equals to, and then we'll grab the last UL here, UL end. Remember the semicolon. And please note that you're starting at this level, so you should end at this level, right? We need to be after the for loop. Let's fold this together so that you can see. So we've got nav string start and nav string end. That's before and after the for loop. And then we need to put the navigation out on the page. And we have already written the drawHtml function, so we can just use that again. So after our nav string has been finished here, we can write drawHtml. And where do we need to put it? We need to put it, let's see, in our index. We need to put it in ID navigation. So let's find that. So I'll use the CSS selector for an ID, which is hashtag. And what do I need to put there? Well, I need to add nav string to it. There we go. So now we should, if we're lucky, have a navigation on our page. Nifty, eh? And if I click on it, you can see that the URL changes. And the active page is lighting up. If we look at navigation down here and URL, you can see that this class equals active is moving around. So if I click on the next one, it's on the second one, right? So that's the HTML part that we're moving around depending on which part of the navigation was active. Okay, I will leave this here. This is visible, yes, and you can pause and type this in. Again, you don't need this part, but you're welcome to type it in so that you can remember how it's set. But it's a bit advanced and it's hard to read, so I don't recommend using it unless you're really getting up there in your skill level. But please type this in. Alright, so now we need to do something to draw the page itself. Got the navigation, so we'll go to drawPage here. drawPage, as you remember, accepts a parameter, and we'll just call that page ID again. And yeah, we'll have drawPage look through the JSON object and find the page object that we want to use while we draw the page. to try that out, see how that works. So we'll create a constant. We can call it page, and we'll have that be equal to the return of a findPageById function. So we'll create that function there afterwards. findPageById, and that should accept drawPageNav string. That doesn't make sense. Page ID maybe. Yeah, page ID, sure. Yes, findPageById, and we'll serve it page ID as a parameter so that it has an ID to find it by. But since we haven't created any function to do this yet, we might do that now. That might be a good idea. So let's get started on that function. Function findPageById, page ID. So now we need to loop through the pages of our JSON object, find the one we need, and return that, just that part of the object. Start out by declaring a variable, by a page variable, which is going to be the object that we return. Yes, and we start to loop through our pages in the JSON object, and as long as I is lesser than data.pages.length, because again we're looping through the pages, and we increment I by 1, not 3 pluses, 2 pluses. Yes, we're good. And now if the page we're currently looking at is equal, that page's ID is equal to the page ID, then we need to return that page to the object, to the new object that we're creating here. So data.pages, and the one we're currently at in the loop. And if that page's ID is equal to page ID, and this should have been an if sentence. If that is the case, then we do something, and what we do is that we say page, our variable from up here. We set that to be equal to data.pages I, and then we can stop the for loop. So we are taking this part of the object and putting into the page variable, and now we need the function to return that page variable. So let's do that. Return page. This means that when we do drawPage up here, we add a value to page, which is the same as the return value of findPageById with the page ID that we are serving it, which happens down here below. If we up here in console log this, just to check if we're doing okay, page, then we should get a new type of JSON object, not new type of JSON object, a new JSON object that has the page that we want to find information in it. So let's see what happens. Alright, ID 4, we're on news, page ID 4, yes. So this is basically the news page that we've got in our object now. If I press home, you can see it changes to ID 1, and we have the home page, about us, etc. Nice. Let's test something, by the way. Let's see what happens if we take that page that has been hidden, the About You page, and set that to true. Alright, we've got about you as a page as well now. So that part actually works fine as well. Let's just set it to false again. That works good. So let's get back down here. findPageById is done. drawPage, we're doing that. We've tested it. You're welcome to pause now and type in these two and make sure that it works by looking at the console and finding the information of the page that you are clicking at down here. The ID here and ID here should match, and if we remove this, it should still be ID 1. Okay, go ahead and pause. Yes. That was hot. So let's see. drawPage. Yes, we have found the page by ID. The order of the functions doesn't matter. What's important is that you don't embed one function into another. So you can't have function findPageById inside a function drawPage, but the order of them doesn't matter. Alright, let's see. After creating the page variable, which has the JSON object of the current page, we can put the title of the page inside of the title tag, and let's have a function for that. So I'll create one called drawTitle, and we'll add page to it. Of course, we don't have that function for now, so we can just build it down here. drawTitle, and that accepts something. It accepts the page. So let's just use the same variable name here as we do in the parameter. And how we change the title tag on the page is pretty simple. We use the document object. So document.title can't be set to a new string, so we could write whatever we want in here. But we want to change it to something that is from the JSON object. So we can start out by saying page.metadata.title. Because page here is a JSON object, and that is basically the JSON object of the page from our older object here. So for page 1, it would be page would be this one, right? So page metadata title. That would be our path down to the information, which we've got here. So whenever we click on a new navigation item, we should actually see a change in the title. So let's test that. Another page, it says right now, home, another page, news, latest news. It's using the information from the JSON object, which is latest news and not just news. There's a difference between the name and the title in those objects. Let's see. Can be a difference. Let's find about you, another page, news, latest news. So you can see name is news and title is latest news. That's why there's a difference between the two. Okay, let's go down here. Yes, we also have the prepend and append information in our JSON data in the site object. So we have title prepend and title append. So if we use data site title prepend and data site title append as information, then we can put those in front of and after the title. So let's try that. We've got this, so we can use data site what's that, metadata, and title append. Sorry, this should be prepend plus, and is it data site metadata? I can't remember now. Data site, no, it's just data site, no need for metadata. So there we go. So data.site.title append, which is after. So now we have added the two strings from the site information to each page. So we've got the wicked smiley and the JSON company. So that's added to all of them now. Okay, and we can see it if we look at elements down here. We can see it's inside of the title tag. It's still not inside of the actual HTML page, but it's in the DOM version of that HTML page. Okay, that was drawTitle. So we got that fixed up here, down here. We got that function, and you are welcome to pause and type that now. So drawTitle and drawPage, make sure those fits whatever you see on the screen now. Good. Let's continue with drawPage. We need to figure out what to put on the page, which kind of template to use, because we have two different page types. We have the normal page and we have news. So let's create a constant called template and have that to be equal to this page's metadata and the template key there. Const, there we go. And now we can choose between different page templates, and right now we only have two, but let's say we could have an infinite amount of different templates if we wanted to. So let's create a switch case for them, which means we use a switch and then we use template as a value. So we say, well, look at the variable template, and if the value of that, in case the value is page, then do this. We wanted to draw template, drawTemplatePage, and we wanted to use the data from page when it does so. And then we add break because we wanted to stop this case. Then we have another case in case the value of template is news. Then we wanted to do this instead. drawTemplateNews, and we wanted to use page as data again. And we wanted to break here. And if you have further templates beyond these two, well, then you can just keep adding case whatever and create new functions that renders those. Okay, so we need to start right now. We can't check if this works because we don't have these two functions, so we'll just create those functions as empty functions and see if it works for now. If it doesn't come up with any errors, then we're good. So let's see for now. drawTemplatePage, and we need to use the keyword function in front of it. Yes. And we can create a copy of this and template news. Alright, so now we shouldn't get any errors when we run this. So let's see. Console, no errors. We're good. Remember, if you're not using live update here, you have to refresh yourself. Press F5, Control R, Control Shift R. Right. Funny. Alright. So no errors. We're good. Type this part in and these two. Make sure drawPage and these two are as is here. You can pause the video now and do that. Alright, so let's get on with drawTemplatePage, which is the simpler one of them. It accepts a parameter, which is page, so let's just use the same name here. That makes sense. Then In the same way as we did before with the navigation and stuff like that, we create a new constant that is a string, and we add whatever we want HTML-wise in there, and then we output that string somewhere in the HTML using drawHtml. So let's see, we'll create a constant and we'll call it content, and we'll set that to be equal to ~graphs. Remember, shift, the key next to backspace, space, and then they show up. So what we need to put in here is article. Let's just copy that and make it a closed one. And inside of this we want an h1, and we want an image tag, and we want a div class equals text and a div end. Alright, this image should have a source and it should have an alt attribute. And now we need to add some values inside of these. We need something, we need a headline, right? So let's use $, curly brackets. Then we can enter this variable inside of the ~graph string, right? So let's just put, we've got page, which is the JSON object of the page itself. Page dot content dot header. And we know that it's content.header by looking at how it's built up in here. So if let's fold that together, you can see here's a page 1. We have metadata, we don't want that one, and then we have content. And inside of content we have header. So the page we're at and .content.header. Then we will see welcome if we're on the first page. And the same for the page.content.image, the page.content.text. So we'll get these values here. So you can see here's the source value for the image. So let's try that down here. Where are we at? We're down here. Yes. So the source value should be $, the page.content.image. So that is whatever is inside of that string there, and we can add an alt tag because of SEO. That is page.content.header. So we replicate the header here. Okay, then we need the text from the page. So we use $ again, curly brackets, and that was in page.content.text. Right, let's check that out. Well, we can actually see if it works in a minute, so let's not do that. And we want to draw this string inside of the HTML in our root area here, right? So we've got main, and then we have this root here. So let's target this ID root with our drawHtml. ID root, and we'll put the value of content inside of it. So we've got this constant called content, and we're putting the value of that inside of the element that has the ID root. Let's see if that works. Alright, we have a headline and we have some text, and the images on these two pages are actually the same, but you can see the text change at the bottom here. So that's nice. And news doesn't have a template yet, so it's just the navigation and footer. Okay, that's the page. So that was quite simple. And now we need to do something for the news area. But let's have you type in this drawTemplatePage function first. So you can pause the video and do that. And of course check that it works. When you've done that, you can move on to the next here. We need to do a drawTemplateNews, which is borderlining the same thing here, so we can just copy this whole thing if we're really clever. which we are. So we have this part, this bit. So we've got template news that looks kinda like the news item before. Oh, sorry, like a normal page. But we have a few differences. In image, we want to remove article here, and we want to add a class to this image here. Class equals news image. And the source is still page content image, and alternate is still page content header. That's fine. And the headline is still page content header. That's good. The text is still page content text, so we're good there. And this should result in us seeing the news page looking pretty much the same as the rest of the pages now. Uh-oh. Page is not defined. Well, we're missing something, right? We need to put in the parameter that we get when we call it. So let's add page here. So now we've got our news page, which looks a bit different from the others, right? But we want to add the news items that we have in our JSON object as well. Let's see up here. We have our pages. Let's collapse those and expand these. So we have these news items, and we want to show them as well. We've got a lot of them actually here. Yeah. So let's do something that shows these news items on the news page. And we've got template news here, so we keep on working on that. At the end of our content string here, we can add a call to a function that we're gonna write in a second. So if we create a call here, we just add the usual $ curly brackets so that we can put in some JavaScript here, and the JavaScript we're putting in here is newsList parenthesis. So this is actually a call to a function which we can create afterwards. And let's just do that function newsList. This means that if we return something here, if we return test, we should now be able to see the word test underneath our page content text, because that's what this function is doing. It is returning test. Let's see. Right, we've got test down here. Test function, just to make sure that we're dealing with the right thing. We are. So that's fine, that's working. So we need to return something here. So we can just call that content again. Right now we don't have anything in that, so let's create that. Let content be equal to, and we'll create a headline here. Latest news, and in that headline. So we're starting off content here. So now there should be a headline called latest news on the page. Let's see. We're good. Okay. We want to add something here because we want to put all of our news items in a list below this. And we can do this by having them as articles that just show up in the HTML. So we'll do a for loop again and then loop through our news items in the JSON object. So for loop with let I be equal to 0, and as long as I is lesser than data dot news, not pages, news dot length. Then we keep going and we increment by 1 for each iteration. So now we have a for loop that loops through all of the news items. And to make it more simple to put in variables and stuff, we create a new variable called item that is equal to the one that we're at right now. So data.news, the one we're at. So now we can just use item instead of writing data.news square brackets I every time. And we need this because now we want to add to our content string. So we see content plus equals, and we use accent graphs again. So first of all, we start by creating an article tag, and we'll set that to class news item, and we'll end that article tag right away to make sure that I remember it. Then we need a header, h3, and I'll close that right away as well. h3, and inside of this, no, let's just build up the rest of the HTML before we start adding variables. It makes it easier to look at. A div with the class of something. We're gonna need a few of these, so I'll just create them at the same time. We need 3 of these, so 2 more. And let's see, inside of this one, I need a new one. And inside of this one, I want an image. Class equals image. I might as well write that right now. It should have a source and an alt because of SEO. And then I actually need one more of these, so I'll just copy that and move it down here. Why did that skip out? Okay, so now I will start from the top here, and this one should have the class of date. This one should have the class of teaser. This one should have the class of text wrapper. This one should have the class of image wrapper. This one is image, that's fine. And this one should have the class of text. Okay. And now we need to add some variables, and all of these will be the $sign curly brackets. I'll just hold down Alt, and let's see, how many do we need? There, 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 and there, and there. So I can do like this, and I've prepared all of them. So what we need at first here is we need to put the header from the item, which is our current data, right? Our current data news item. So we say item, and we're looking into the content from that. Let's look at that. So we've got, for each news item, we've got metadata and we've got content. So for our item, content, header, that's what we're looking for. Item.content.header. So now we should have a headline for each of them. The date is item.metadata. And .date. Alright, teaser, that's part of the content. So item.content.teaser. And we've got the image, which is also part of the content, item.content.image. And we'll use the headline again here. So item.content.header as alt tag, and we need item content dot text, not teaser, here. Alright, are we missing anything? We've got header. Inside of a header we've got date, which is date. We've got teaser, which is teaser. We've got the image in the image tag, and we've got the header as the alt for the image tag. And we've got text for text. Alright, let's see if this works. There, yeah. I will pause here and let you type in the newsList, and then you should be good. This is sort of the end of the lesson. I will figure out a way to have you be able to ask me questions after you've seen the video and you've done the typing. This will be announced on Canvas. But for now, I want you to do a bit of reflection, use 5 minutes to discuss in your groups if you're able to what you have learned. You can do this over any media you want, or any, what you've learned, what was surprising, why, how you can use what you've learned in this lesson in your project work or in your professional work. And if you can answer the question, do I need structured data, and should it be in JSON format, and then that will be fine. You don't know a lot of different formats of structured data, so that question might be a bit weird, but try to see if you can give a good answer to that. And afterwards, take a couple of minutes and write a few lines based on your group discussion, and get your work portfolio sorted afterwards. Yeah, I'll make sure that I schedule some time for you to ask questions about this lesson. Right? Bye. Bye, Dan.